Have you ever felt overwhelmed just by looking around your own home, wondering how all this stuff piled up over the years? It's a feeling many older women know all too well, a quiet kind of frustration mixed with a touch of sadness. I've been there myself, staring at rooms filled with decades of memories and things I wasn't ready to let go of, feeling stuck and unsure where to even begin. It's easy to feel like you're trapped under the weight of your belongings, like they're holding you back from enjoying the freedom you deserve. But here's the good news. There's a way to gently reclaim your space without the stress or guilt that usually comes with decluttering. No harsh judgment, no marathon sorting sessions. Just simple, manageable steps designed especially for women over 65. These aren't your typical get rid of everything tips. They're thoughtful, compassionate strategies that honor your memories while freeing you to live your best life now. I'm about to share 7 secrets that helped one woman clear out 40 years of clutter in just 48 hours, and feel lighter, happier, and more in control than she had in years. Imagine what it would be like to wake up each day in a home that truly supports you. So, tell me, what's the one thing in your home you wish you could let go of but haven't yet? You deserve a peaceful, joyful space, and the journey to get there starts today. If you are not subscribed, subscribe and activate the notification bell so you don't miss any videos. If you like the topic of this video, please comment 1. Now, let's begin. 1. The triage method. Vivian's journey began in a place familiar to so many of us. Standing in the heart of her home, surrounded by memories that seemed to cling to every corner, every shelf, and every drawer. 40 years worth of life, laughter, and loss were packed into those rooms. The sheer volume of it all could have paralyzed anyone, but especially someone in their 70s, living alone for the first time in decades. Vivian looked around, feeling the quiet ache of her husband's absence, the echo of her children's footsteps now only a memory, and she wondered, how am I ever going to do this? That first morning, the anxiety was thick enough to touch. Everywhere she looked, she saw not just objects, but entire chapters of her life. The chipped mug from her honeymoon in Santa Fe, the collection of Christmas ornaments her children made, the faded armchair where she used to read to her granddaughter. How do you choose what stays and what goes when so much of your heart is woven into the fabric of your home? Vivian's answer came from an unlikely source: emergency medicine. She remembered watching a medical show where ER doctors would quickly sort patients based on the urgency of their needs, a process called triage. She thought, if they can make life or death decisions in minutes, maybe I can borrow that logic for my mountain of stuff. It sounded almost silly at first, but as she mulled it over, the idea started to make sense. In a way, her home had become an emergency of its own, a place in desperate need of triage. So, Vivian grabbed a yellow legal pad and wrote at the top, the triage method. Her goal was simple: move through her house, room by room, and sort every item into 3 categories, with no second-guessing and no looking back. The first category she called, can't live without it. These were the essentials, the things that genuinely mattered for her health, safety, and daily comfort. Her prescription medications, her late husband's army dog tags, her passport and insurance papers, the cozy bathrobe she reached for every single night. She held each of these items for a moment, honoring the memories but recognizing their ongoing importance in her life. The second category was what she dubbed the might need it someday pile. This, she realized, was her personal danger zone, the reason so much clutter had accumulated over the years. This pile included items like the extra blankets, just in case the kids visit, a blender she hadn't used since her granddaughter's last milkshake obsession, and kitchen gadgets she bought during hopeful but short-lived culinary phases. The temptation was always there, to hold on, just in case. But the more she looked at this mountain of maybes, the more she realized they were rooted in fear and a longing for the past that no longer matched her reality. The third and final category was the most difficult, and the most liberating: haven't touched it in over a year. This was the stuff that had lingered, collecting dust and quietly stealing her peace of mind. The once loved but now forgotten sweaters, the books with yellowed pages, the sets of china she hadn't brought out since her daughter's wedding in 1987. The rule here was simple and unbreakable. If it hadn't been used in over a year, it was time for it to go. Vivian committed herself to making each decision swiftly, 15 minutes per room. She knew that lingering would only let doubt creep in, and doubt was her worst enemy. With her timer set, she walked into her kitchen. It was almost comical how quickly she found herself staring at 23 mismatched mugs when, in truth, she only drank tea now and always reached for the same two. She put her favorites into the can't live without box, and the rest, gifts, souvenirs, and impulse buys, into the donation bag. China went too, along with gadgets she didn't even remember buying. At first, there was a pang of regret. She worried, as many do, that letting go was somehow erasing her history. But with every item released, the feeling changed from guilt to relief. The empty spaces on the shelves began to feel like breathing room, not loss. In the living room, the triage became even more revealing. Vivian counted 47 decorative pillows. She smiled at the absurdity. 6 chairs, 47 pillows. When had her life become a showcase for throw pillows and unused throws? Out they went, except for the 2 favorites that reminded her of family movie nights. As for the candles, dozens of them, untouched for years because of her growing anxiety about open flames, Vivian realized she was holding on to the idea of romance, not the reality. She let go. With each room, Vivian's confidence grew. She became more ruthless, not because she cared less, but because she understood more deeply what truly mattered to her now. The triage method was no longer just a sorting system. It was a process of self-discovery. She began to see her possessions with new eyes, noticing what genuinely added comfort or joy, and what had become a quiet burden. The can't live without box is filled with practical essentials and a handful of cherished keepsakes. The might need it someday pile shrank rapidly as she realized how rarely she'd ever missed something she'd let go in the past. And the over a year bag? It grew and grew, its contents a testament to a life lived fully, but also to a readiness to move forward. By the end of the day, Vivian looked around and felt something she hadn't in years, a lightness, a sense of control. The triage method didn't just clear her home, it helped her reclaim her peace of mind. It proved that, even after a lifetime of collecting, it's never too late to let go of what weighs you down and keep only what lifts you. For Vivian, and so many women like her, this was the first real step toward a future that finally felt possible. 2. 10-minute decision sessions. Vivian's first night after starting her triage left her feeling lighter, but also exhausted in a way she hadn't expected. Decluttering wasn't just about sorting things. It was about facing a lifetime's worth of memories, both sweet and bittersweet, all at once. The next morning, she woke up determined, but knew she needed a smarter, gentler way to keep going. She was already starting to feel the fatigue that comes with making so many decisions in a row, a kind of tiredness that seeps not only into your body but into your heart and mind. She remembered how, when her kids were young, she could spend an entire Saturday cleaning the whole house, racing from room to room with energy to spare. But now, after just a couple of hours, she found herself staring off into space, memories swirling, and her body reminding her of its new limits. The thought of clearing out her entire house in a weekend, like she might have done at 40, now felt almost impossible. She needed a new approach, one that matched the reality of her life today. That's when she stumbled upon the idea of 10-minute decision sessions. It sounded almost too simple, but also, somehow, freeing. Instead of pushing herself to clean for hours, she would commit to just 10 minutes at a time, and only tackle one small area. Maybe a shelf, a single drawer, a section of her closet. She set a timer, told herself it was okay to stop as soon as the bell rang, and got started. The very first 10-minute session she tried was in the top drawer of her bedroom dresser, a drawer she hadn't opened in years. As soon as the timer began, Vivian realized how much she'd been dreading this. The loose change, expired coupons, dozens of old greeting cards, keys that opened who knows, half-used tubes of hand cream, and a mountain of rubber bands. It was the kind of messy, sentimental jumble that had always made her want to slam the drawer shut and pretend it didn't exist. If you are still watching this video and find these lessons useful, please comment 1 below to let me know that you are still here with me. But something interesting happened. With only 10 minutes to make decisions, she felt a sense of urgency, but not the panic she'd expected. There simply wasn't time to overthink. She found herself moving more quickly than she thought possible. Items that might have sparked an internal debate, but what if I need this someday, were now swiftly sorted. Keep, toss, or donate. She threw away broken pens and expired coupons without a second thought, and placed a few especially sweet cards into her memory box. The rest, she let go. When the timer buzzed, she put everything down and stepped away, even though there were a few items left. At first, she felt a twinge of guilt, like she hadn't finished the job. But then she realized she was still clear-headed, still energized, and, most importantly, not overwhelmed. For the first time, she looked forward to her next session, instead of dreading it. Throughout that first day, Vivian completed a dozen 10-minute sessions. Some were easy, a single bathroom shelf, the magazine rack in the living room. Others, like her craft supplies cabinet, required a bit more courage. But each time, she stuck to her rule: 10 minutes, then stop. Between sessions, she'd make herself a cup of tea, look out the window at her small garden, or call a friend. She realized she could pace herself and still make real progress. The best part was how quickly the results added up. By mid-afternoon, she looked around and saw clear surfaces and open spaces she hadn't seen in years. It was a kind of progress she could feel, not just in her home, but in her spirit. For the first time, decluttering didn't feel like an endless, draining marathon. It felt like a series of small victories, each one giving her confidence to tackle the next. Vivian discovered a few surprises about herself along the way. She noticed that she made her best decisions in the first few minutes before fatigue set in. The more time she gave herself, the more likely she was to fall back into old habits of holding on to things, just in case. 10 minutes was just enough time to trust her instincts, but not so much that she got bogged down in regret or nostalgia. She also noticed that by working in short bursts, she was able to be more present and thoughtful, focusing on each small area with care and attention. As she moved from room to room, the house began to change, almost as if it was breathing easier along with her. The kitchen counter cleared, the bathroom drawers organized, and the stacks of old magazines vanished. Even the most daunting spaces, the garage, the attic, became manageable when approached 10 minutes at a time. Vivian realized that this method was perfect for anyone whose energy and stamina weren't what they used to be. It honored her limits without making her feel inadequate. It respected her memories while still helping her move forward. And perhaps most importantly, it gave her a sense of agency. For too long, she had felt like the clutter was in control, dictating the pace of her life and the limits of her freedom. Now, with every 10-minute session, she was taking her life back, one small decision at a time. Looking back, Vivian knew she never would have succeeded if she tried to do it all at once. 10 minutes might not seem like much, but when strung together, it's more than enough to reclaim a home and a sense of peace. If you ever feel too tired or overwhelmed to start, remember, all it takes is 10 minutes. Just set a timer, pick a single spot, and begin. You'll be amazed at how far you can go, one small step at a time. 3. The Stranger Test. Vivian had made remarkable progress with her triage method and those gentle, focused 10-minute sessions. But as the visible clutter shrank, she found herself facing an entirely new kind of challenge: sentimental clutter. If you've ever opened a closet and been greeted not by junk, but by boxes of family photos, handwritten letters, your children's old artwork, or the wedding china passed down from your mother, you'll understand exactly where Vivian was stuck. At first, she tried to use the same rules she'd applied to mugs and mixing bowls. But as she sifted through her attic, She froze in front of a dusty box labeled Mom's Treasures. She found her late husband's letters from Vietnam, the baby shoes her daughter wore home from the hospital, report cards and graduation programs, and a dozen Christmas ornaments, each with their own story. These weren't just things. They were pieces of her heart, memories woven into every scrap of paper and worn-out keepsake. That's when Vivian realized she needed a new strategy, one that would let her honor the past without being held prisoner by it. She remembered an offhand comment her daughter once made after a friend's funeral. It was so hard watching strangers sort through her stuff, not knowing what meant anything and what was just clutter. The words struck her. What if, instead of drowning in nostalgia and guilt, she could see her possessions through the eyes of someone who didn't know the stories? What if she asked herself, would a stranger understand why I kept this? And so, she began what she called the stranger test. Vivian picked up a stack of yellowed magazines from the 1990s. She thought about her children, grown now, busy with their lives on the other side of the country. One day having to decide what to do with these things. Would a stranger keep a stack of magazines, or would they quickly drop them in the recycling bin? The answer was obvious. With a deep breath, she let them go. Next, she tackled the overflowing boxes of her children's old school projects. Glittery macaroni art, crayon portraits, little trophies, and handprints in faded paint. Each piece tugged at her heart. The stranger test, though, helped her be objective. Would someone else know which ones truly captured her child's spirit, and which were just another drawing? Vivian realized she didn't need to keep all 200. She chose the 10 most meaningful, photographed the rest, and gently placed them in a donation pile or recycling bag. For the first time, she felt a strange mix of sadness and relief, a sense that she was keeping the essence of the memory, not the clutter. Perhaps the hardest test came with her photo albums. Vivian had 23, some half-finished, some bursting at the seams. Many photos were blurry, filled with faces she could no longer name, or scenes from vacations that had faded from her memory. She asked herself, if a stranger looked through these, what would they see? The answer was clear, a few gems, buried in a sea of forgettable snapshots. She kept only the albums that told her story with joy and meaning, 3 in total, and donated or recycled the rest, confident that the memories lived in her heart, not just on paper. The process wasn't easy. There were days when she felt guilty, as if by letting go of things, she was letting go of the people and moments they represented. But the stranger test became her anchor. She reminded herself, if I'm holding on to something only out of guilt or obligation, maybe it's time to let it go with love. The things that truly mattered, the handwritten letters from her late husband, her mother's recipe cards, her father's battered fishing hat, those went into a special box marked, Keep Forever. But the piles of unused gifts, the fancy dishes she'd never served a meal on, and the collections that no one but her remembered, those were released with gratitude and, sometimes, even a little laughter at how much space they had taken up for so long. Vivian also tried the stranger test on her wardrobe, which she'd avoided for months. She asked herself, would a stranger understand why I kept these business suits from a career I retired from 10 years ago? The answer came quickly. Out they went, off to a charity where a new generation of women might use them for their first job interviews or office meetings. She found the same clarity in her bookshelves, loaded with romances and cookbooks she'd read once and would never read again. A stranger wouldn't hesitate, so neither did she. Donation box after donation box left her home, and the rooms began to feel lighter, less crowded by the past and more open to the present. For the first time in years, Vivian felt the joy of space, the sense of breathing room that so many of us crave but never realize we're missing. She noticed how much more she cherished the items she kept, the way the sunlight touched her husband's old watch, the warmth she felt every time she saw her granddaughter's handprint framed above her writing desk. These things had survived the stranger test, not because they were expensive or rare, but because they truly meant something deep in her heart. Vivian learned that the real value of her memories wasn't in the sheer number of things she owned, but in the meaning they carried forward. The stranger test didn't erase her past. It set her free to carry it more lightly and to pass along what truly mattered. And as she looked around at her home, no longer crowded by forgotten trinkets, she felt ready, finally, to create new memories, with space and peace to welcome whatever came next. 4. The replacement reality check. After a few days of steady progress, Vivian began to notice something curious about the things she was struggling to let go of. The items left behind weren't the obvious treasures or the easy-to-discard junk, but the in-between things, the just-in-case gadgets, the extra sets of towels, the gadgets she bought for a project she never started, and the shoes she never quite broke in. Her closets and cupboards still overflowed, not with meaningful keepsakes, but with the kind of things she kept because you never know. It was the same logic she'd grown up with, learned from her parents who lived through hard times. Don't waste, hold on to what you have, and someday it might come in handy. She knew her generation wasn't alone in that thinking, but after 73 years, her just-in-case stash was stealing precious space and, more importantly, her peace of mind. One afternoon, as Vivian sat cross-legged on her bedroom carpet, surrounded by boxes of rarely used kitchen appliances, she realized she was falling into the same mental trap again. She stared at her old bread machine, a bulky relic that had spent most of its life collecting dust since the 2 times she'd used it nearly a decade ago. A familiar wave of uncertainty washed over her. What if I get the urge to bake my bread next month? What if my neighbor needs to borrow one? But as she pictured the bread machine sitting unused for another year, she felt a quiet frustration rise up. Was this fear of needing something someday really worth the clutter it caused every single day? That's when Vivian decided to invent a new system, the replacement reality check. She called it that because it forced her to face the real, honest questions behind her just-in-case reasoning. For every item she hesitated over, she made herself answer 3 tough but eye-opening questions. First, if I suddenly needed this exact item tomorrow, could I realistically get another one? In today's world, with thrift stores on every corner and Amazon just a click away, the answer was almost always yes. Vivian laughed to herself as she realized how many of her irreplaceable things could be found for a few dollars at the local Goodwill. Second, what would it cost me to replace this item now? Vivian picked up a tangle of rarely used screwdrivers. She had 12 scattered throughout the house, collected over the years from toolkits, gifts, and impulse purchases. She looked them up online. Even a brand new set would cost less than the price of her weekly groceries. Why was she giving up valuable storage space for duplicates she never touched, all for the slim chance she might need them someday? And finally, in the last 5 years, how many times have I needed this for anything important? For so many things, the honest answer was 0. The backup toaster, the old curling iron, the 4 sets of mixing bowls, the camping lantern she bought for a family trip that never happened. All had been dragged from house to house, through every stage of life, and used, maybe once, maybe never. Vivian applied her replacement reality check to every maybe item, starting with her kitchen. Out went the extra coffee makers, the backup blender, and the fondue pot from a long-forgotten New Year's Eve party. She kept 1 set of measuring spoons, the one she used. She realized that if she ever wanted to try her hand at fondue again, she could rent a pot, or better yet, borrow one from a friend who still enjoyed entertaining. The relief was immediate. She felt her kitchen open up, countertops cleared, cabinets breathing, drawers finally easy to close. If you are still watching this video and find these lessons useful, please comment 2 below to let me know that you are still here with me. The reality check spilled over into other rooms. Vivian tackled her linen closet next. She found herself clinging to faded sheets and scratchy towels, just in case she had guests. But it had been years since anyone had spent the night, and if someone did, wouldn't she want to offer them her best? She kept 2 good sets and donated the rest, and for the first time in years, her closet felt neat and manageable. In the garage, she confronted her garden tools and sporting equipment, tennis rackets, old soccer balls, and a jumble of rakes and shovels. Arthritis had made gardening difficult, and it had been years since she'd played tennis. The replacement reality check made it easier. These things were not just unnecessary, they were a reminder of an earlier chapter, and it was okay to let them go. She kept a few simple tools for the small herb pots on her porch and donated the rest to the local community garden. Perhaps the most liberating application of the replacement reality check was with furniture and larger items. Vivian had held onto 3 extra dining chairs, just in case she hosted a big Thanksgiving again. But the truth was, she hadn't entertained a crowd in years. She smiled at the thought, if she ever needed more seating, she could easily borrow chairs or rent them for a few dollars. Why let, just in case, rob her of space for living now? Vivian came to see that the true cost of keeping things wasn't measured in dollars, but in the daily toll they took on her life. Time spent cleaning, the frustration of searching, and the constant reminder of unfinished projects. Letting go didn't mean being unprepared. It meant trusting herself to handle life's surprises, knowing she could always find a way. As her house emptied, Vivian felt a growing lightness, a sense that she was no longer beholden to the what-ifs. She found room not just in her home, but in her heart, for what mattered now. The replacement reality check gave her the courage to choose freedom over fear, and as she moved through each room, she whispered to herself, I have everything I truly need. For the first time in years, she truly believed it. 5. Energy Investment Scale. Vivian had already experienced a remarkable shift. Her house felt lighter, the air seemed fresher, and even her sleep deepened now that the mountains of just-in-case clutter and forgotten memories had begun to disappear. Yet, as she moved forward, she found herself hitting a wall, not of stuff, but of energy. After several days of sorting, tossing, and donating, she realized that her body and spirit could only give so much. She'd reach into a box or pull open a drawer and suddenly feel an unexpected exhaustion, a wave of fatigue that settled into her bones. She began to notice a pattern. The hardest days weren't when she sorted the big, obvious things, the old blender, the duplicate towels, the stacks of mail. It was when she found herself facing items that tugged at her heart or raised uncomfortable questions. These were the things that left her drained and emotionally raw at the end of the day. Her late husband's toolkit, a box of her mother's costume jewelry, stacks of letters written in her college years, each holding 1,000 forgotten hopes. Vivian realized, perhaps for the first time, that decluttering wasn't just about what you keep or let go. It was about where you spent your emotional energy. Some things she could handle in a flash, a chipped mug, a faded t-shirt, an old spatula. Other things took real soul-searching. Why, she wondered. Was she spending the same amount of effort agonizing over a half-used notebook as she did over a love letter? One evening, sitting with a cup of chamomile tea, Vivian decided to invent a new system for herself, the energy investment scale. She thought of her energy as a precious resource, one that, at 73, she needed to invest wisely. The system was simple. For every object she touched, she'd quickly rate its importance to her emotional life on a scale of 1 to 10. A 1. No hesitation, no guilt, out it goes. A 10. That item deserved real attention, careful storage, and a place of honor in her home and her heart. The next morning, Vivian tried it out, starting in her living room with her collection of books. Most were old paperbacks, romance novels, outdated cookbooks, and dusty self-help guides she'd only ever skimmed. She smiled to herself, realizing that not one of these would rate higher than a 2 or 3. Why give them any more energy? They went straight into the donation box, and she felt a spark of satisfaction as if she'd just reclaimed a tiny bit of herself. Her late husband's technical manuals, those rated a 3. She paused, wondering if her son might want them, but decided 30 seconds was enough. Into the box they went, with a mental note to ask the kids if they wanted anything before her next trip to Goodwill. But then she came across her grandmother's worn, handwritten cookbook. The recipes were in faded blue ink, some pages smudged with flour and love, the margins filled with notes from 3 generations of cooks. Vivian felt a swell of tenderness. This, she decided, was a solid 9, an object not just of memory, but of legacy. She gently cleaned the cover, placed it in a plastic sleeve, and tucked it into a kitchen drawer where she could find it easily. Later, she'd even make a digital copy for her daughter and granddaughter, just to keep the tradition alive. Moving into her bedroom closet, Vivian faced the clothing that had been packed on the rack tight for decades. She'd always told herself she might wear those party dresses again, or those heels she could barely stand in anymore. As she scanned each piece, she asked herself, how much energy do I want to give this? Most were 1s and 2s. Donate, no question. Only a handful of special outfits, like the cardigan her daughter gave her for her 70th birthday or the scarf her husband brought from Paris, rated higher. Those she arranged with care, grateful for the memories but glad to have space for her current favorites. Vivian soon saw that her real energy vampires were often the things she'd spent the most time worrying about. The decorative plates she never displayed, the projects she meant to finish, the gadgets that were supposed to change her life but just ended up collecting dust. These items, she realized, didn't deserve her attention or her anxiety. The energy investment scale helped her say goodbye without the usual battle of guilt and regret. Her paperwork got the same treatment. Old tax returns, 1s and 2s, shredded without a backward glance. Important documents, like her will and insurance policies, 10s, filed with extra care. For the first time, her home office felt open, organized, and most importantly, manageable. The biggest gift of the energy investment scale was the freedom it brought. Vivian no longer ended her days wrung out and defeated. She learned to protect her emotional reserves, spending them only on things that brought joy, comfort, or real meaning. It was like gaining a little more life with every bag she let go. By the end of her journey, Vivian realized something profound. Decluttering wasn't a battle to be fought in a single weekend, nor was it a punishment for letting life get busy. It was a way of loving herself, of honoring the life she'd built and freeing up space to enjoy what mattered now. She had more energy for what she truly loved, connecting with friends, painting in the afternoon light, and dreaming of new adventures. Vivian's home, once weighed down with things that no longer served her, became a sanctuary. And each time she touched an item, she quietly asked herself, is this worth my precious energy? More and more, the answer was clear. And with each answer, she grew lighter, more peaceful, more present, and more herself than she'd been in years. 6. The Future Self-Test. Vivian's home had changed in ways she never could have imagined. Gone were the chaotic piles in the hall closet, the kitchen drawers that barely opened, and the attic weighed down by decades of what if and just in case. She had sorted, donated, and let go of so much, and in the process, she felt years of heaviness begin to lift from her spirit. Yet, in the quiet of the early evening, sitting at her dining table, she felt a new sort of uncertainty creep in, not about her past, but about her future. She realized that all the methods she'd used so far had helped her handle the physical clutter, but now she was face to face with a different kind of decision. As she opened a box of business suits from her long career, she could still feel the pride in the stiff collars and smooth lines. Each jacket seemed to whisper her old titles, her decades of accomplishment, and her identity as a respected executive. At the same time, something inside her had shifted. She no longer wanted to wake up to a life ruled by meeting schedules and emails. She dreamed of painting, traveling, sleeping in when the mood struck, of finally learning how to play the piano. It was then, as she sat with her memories, that she asked herself the question that would transform her approach. Does keeping this help me become the woman I want to be in the years ahead, or is it tying me to a version of myself that has already lived her story? She called it the Future Self-Test. Every time Vivian picked up an object, she pictured the woman she was becoming, the retiree with a love for watercolor, the grandmother eager for adventures with her grandkids, the friend who finally had time to nurture old relationships and start new ones. She wanted her home, her routines, and even the objects she owned to support the future she was building, not just the history she cherished. The business suits were the first real test. They had been expensive, hard-earned, and filled with memories of victories and setbacks, but as she held them, Vivian felt more nostalgia than excitement. Her future self wanted comfort and creativity, not meetings and deadlines. With a mix of sadness and relief, she kept a single blazer for special occasions and donated the rest to a non-profit that helped women re-enter the workforce. She imagined another woman, nervous but hopeful, walking into her first interview wearing that blazer, and smiled. Next, she turned to her bookshelf, lined with management books and industry guides. In her old life, these books had been her lifeline. Now, she ran her fingers along the spines and felt only the pull of new interests: travel, gardening, art, and even a memoir or two. She let go of the volumes tied to her past career, making space for guidebooks and novels that spoke to her next chapter. Vivian tried the future self-test in her craft room, which had once been overrun by supplies for every hobby she'd ever tried. She realized she'd kept bags of yarn and baskets of fabric because she once thought she should knit or sew, not because it truly sparked joy anymore. The future Vivian saw herself as a painter, so she cleared shelves for watercolors and sketchbooks, moving out the old materials to a local school's art program. She opened the curtains wide, letting sunlight fill the space, her new creative sanctuary. But the test wasn't just about things. Vivian also reflected on habits, routines, and even relationships. She let go of the obligation to host large, stressful holiday dinners, choosing instead to gather her family for a cozy brunch or a picnic in the park. She stopped forcing herself to keep up with old acquaintances who drained her energy, making room for the friends who lifted her and inspired her to grow. The hardest part of the future self-test came when Vivian confronted her late husband's belongings. For 2 years, she had preserved his side of the closet exactly as he'd left it. She realized, through gentle tears, that honoring his memory didn't mean freezing time. She kept a few precious mementos: a favorite flannel shirt, his wedding ring, the fishing hat they'd bought on their honeymoon. The rest she let go, giving them to her children or donating them to people who needed them now. With each decision, she whispered, "Thank you for the memories. I'm ready for my next chapter." Vivian found that as she shaped her home for her future self, she also shaped her mindset. She felt lighter, more hopeful, and more in control. The space around her began to reflect who she truly was, and who she was still becoming. She looked forward to mornings filled with possibilities instead of lists of things to clean or put away. If you are still watching this video and find these lessons useful, please comment 3 below to let me know that you are still here with me. The future self-test didn't erase her past. It honored it, then gently set it down so her hands were free for what came next. As she settled into her favorite chair, a cup of tea in hand, sunlight streaming through windows cleared of clutter, Vivian smiled at the adventure ahead. Her home, once a museum of used to be, was now a welcoming, peaceful space for the life she wanted to create. She would often tell her friends, "You're never too old to grow into someone new." She believed it more deeply every day. And in her heart, Vivian knew she wasn't just making space in her house. She was making space for herself, her future self, the woman she'd always dreamed of becoming, finally given room to flourish. 7. Meaningful completion ceremonies. After weeks of sorting, deciding, and letting go, Vivian had transformed more than just her home. She had begun to transform her relationship with the past itself. Yet as the piles of donated boxes grew, she realized something important. Decluttering wasn't simply about getting rid of things. For many of the items she touched, there were stories, emotions, and memories tangled up deep inside. Simply tossing them into bags or dropping them off felt incomplete, even disrespectful to all that those things represent. Vivian wanted a way to honor the life she'd lived, the people she'd loved, and the moments that had shaped her. So, she created what she called meaningful completion ceremonies. Small rituals to say goodbye to items that had held meaning, allowing her to release them with love instead of guilt or regret. It began one afternoon with her late husband's business suits, the powerful symbols of his career and their shared life. Instead of quietly stuffing them in a donation bag, Vivian carefully laid out her favorite suit, smoothing the fabric as if brushing away years of memories. She sat quietly, eyes closed, and remembered the difficult negotiations he'd won, the late nights he'd worked, the laughter they'd shared. She whispered a blessing, thanking the suit for carrying him through his journey. Then, she folded it gently and placed a small note inside the pocket. May this help someone else step into their dreams. Tears fell softly, but they were tears of peace. The ceremonies grew more elaborate as Vivian moved through her home. For her collection of books, she wrote brief thank you notes to the authors. Words like, "Thank you for teaching me courage," or "Your stories carried me through hard times." She slipped these notes into the pages before donating the books to the local library. Weeks later, when she visited the library, a kind librarian shared how several readers had found the notes touching and inspiring. Vivian felt connected, as if the books had carried a piece of her spirit out into the world. The most powerful ceremony came when Vivian faced boxes of old family photos, blurry snapshots, duplicates, and images of relatives she barely remembered. She couldn't just toss them like trash. Instead, she arranged a memory celebration. Sitting with a cup of tea, she picked up each photo, held it gently, and thanked it aloud for capturing a moment she had loved. Sometimes she laughed at a silly picture of her children. Other times she paused quietly at a faded wedding photo. When she was ready, she placed the photos into a recycling bin, knowing the memories lived inside her heart, not just on paper. One of the most touching ceremonies was for her children's artwork. Instead of feeling overwhelmed by hundreds of finger paintings and crayon drawings, Vivian photographed every piece she wasn't keeping. Then, she created a digital album called My Children's Masterpieces. When she showed it to her adult children, their eyes filled with tears. Suddenly, they had access to a beautiful collection of their childhood creativity, preserved forever without taking up space in the house. She felt joy knowing she had honored their early years in a way that felt meaningful and lasting. Even items that were worn out or broken received a farewell. Vivian held a small retirement ceremony for her favorite sweater, threadbare but beloved. She thanked it for the warmth it gave through countless winters before sending it off to textile recycling. Her mother's mixing bowls, which had helped create thousands of family meals, were held one last time before being gifted to a young neighbor just starting to cook. The ritual transformed what could have been a loss into gratitude. Through these ceremonies, Vivian found healing. They helped her avoid the second-guessing and regrets that often follow decluttering. She didn't have to rush or hide her goodbyes. Instead, she created sacred moments to acknowledge the role each item had played in her life, and then gently let it go. The ceremonies also gave her a renewed sense of control and peace. They weren't about saying goodbye to her past, but about celebrating it fully and making room for the future. Her adult children noticed the change too. Instead of an anxious, overwhelmed woman, they saw someone calm, centered, and ready to embrace whatever came next. When the moving truck finally arrived, Vivian was ready, not just with boxes packed and rooms emptied, but with a heart unburdened. She had cleared out not only her physical space but also the emotional clutter that had weighed on her for years. Looking back, Vivian knew the meaningful completion ceremonies had been the secret ingredient. They transformed decluttering from a chore into a journey of love and remembrance. For anyone struggling to let go of sentimental items, she often said, "Don't rush. Create your ceremonies. Honor the memories, the love, the life behind each thing. It will set you free." And set her free it did. With every blessing spoken and every memory celebrated, Vivian stepped into her new chapter lighter, freer, and full of hope, ready to fill her life with fresh stories and new joys. As the moving truck pulled away, Vivian stood in her quiet, empty home and felt something she hadn't expected, a profound sense of freedom. The walls, once crowded with years of belongings and memories, now seemed to breathe alongside her. She hadn't just cleared out a house. She had cleared out decades of worry, hesitation, and emotional weight. For the first time in a long time, she felt light, ready to embrace the next chapter with open arms and a hopeful heart. 3 months later, Vivian called to share how much her life had transformed. She was teaching art classes at the local senior center, volunteering with community groups, and even exploring the possibility of dating again. She spoke with a joy and confidence that came from knowing she had made space, not just in her home, but in her soul, for new experiences and connections. Decluttering had been more than a task. It had been a journey of rediscovery. Through the 7 ruthless tricks, Vivian didn't just part with things. She discovered who she was becoming. She learned that letting go isn't about losing the past, but about making room for the life you truly want to live. If Vivian's story resonates with you, know this: you deserve that same peace and freedom. What's the first step you'll take to reclaim your space and your life? Share your thoughts below. I read every comment. If you found this video helpful, please like, share it with someone who needs it, and subscribe for more inspiring stories and practical tips designed especially for you. Your best chapter is waiting.